I was really struck by the kind of speed and flexibility of how you all kind of just very quickly developed your research. You pivoted a lot as you found things out. I mean, it was kind of the exactly what you're looking for in an extremely expert research group, which is of being able to navigate a very complex field and find where the gaps were that you could help fill in.
I'm your host, Adam Met, and today we're talking with Mila Rosenthal, the co-founder and managing director of Sustainable Partners, Inc., along with Nia Smith and Rai Saad, two of SPI's 2021 New Futures Fellows. If you've listened to the outro of this show or read the description of an episode, you might have realized that Planet Reimagined is executive produced by Sustainable Partners, a nonprofit that I founded in 2019. This podcast is just one of our programs. Another is our New Futures Fellowship. We bring together undergraduate and graduate students from around the world to create an academic paper and accompanying advocacy materials. I met Mila when she was the head of communications and advocacy for the United Nations Development Program. Now she's the managing director of SPI, along with heading our fellowship program and teaching courses in human rights at Columbia University. She and I speak for a few minutes about the concept of this fellowship program and then bring in Nia and Rai. Nia, an advocacy fellow from this summer's cohort, is an environmental designer and activist from Los Angeles, studying architecture in the hopes of building sustainable low-income housing. Rai, a research fellow also from this summer, is a geographer from Pakistan, pursuing a career in development, advocacy, and law. The four of us talk about their experience in the fellowship, including a discussion of their projects on waste management and coastal access. If you'd like to support the fellowship, make sure to follow Sustainable Partners on Instagram and Twitter. You can find the projects from this summer's cohort at sustainablepartnersinc.org/publications. And if you're interested in becoming a fellow, we'll be opening applications in the spring of 2022. A quick reminder that we're planting a tree for every person who subscribes to this podcast, so make sure to hit that subscribe button. And without further ado, here is Mila Rosenthal, Nia Smith, and Rai Saad on Planet Reimagined. So, Mila, the worlds of research and advocacy. We're going to be talking a lot about it today, but in my experience, and I don't mean to speak for you, but maybe in your experience, academia and activism have been siloed in some ways and have really come together in other ways. I mean, in the halls of universities, we've seen students really become activists and advocates for some really important causes. But at the same time, hard, high-level research has really separated itself from this world of advocacy. Why do you think this happens?
I think there's an idea that academic research has to be so completely independent and has to be completely unbiased, and therefore for it to be seen as part of advocacy, as part of activism, as feeding into a push for social change is something that for some scholars is very uncomfortable. And so there's an idea that there should be kind of a firewall, a separation between pure research and then between pushing for change out in the very messy real world. I think it's that translation between the research to the change is the place that we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, you mentioned the word uncomfortable, and I feel like students love to live in that space of uncomfortable, of pushing the boundaries. And do you see that in your academic experience, in your teaching?
Studying human rights and sustainable development is a challenging subject, and it should be, because it's talking about the most serious problems in the world right now, and it's always asking the question, what are the solutions? So it's not enough to just study what's wrong without using that framework to start suggesting what could be right. that is so the topics are challenging because they're full of human suffering and concern that so many of us have about what's happening around the world. But the answers are challenging too, because we have to think about what's realistic, what's practical, but also what's ambitious and what's aspirational. So I think that is a genuine challenge for professors, for students, for activists, for researchers.
So research and advocacy is the core of what we're going to be talking about today. What really feeds into making change from research and turning it into advocacy?
There are a lot of different avenues for change and pushing for change. And there are, fundamental to it is the idea of power. Can you challenge power? Can you shift power? What influence can we have? Can any of us have, and who has influence? So if you think of pushing for change as thinking about identifying all of those points of leverage and all of those points of influence and how to get them involved, then if research is part of developing the ideas that challenge power and that have the solutions that need to be implemented, then advocacy is the part of thinking about, well, how do you get those in the hands of policymakers, and how do you convince policymakers to make those changes? So the connection is from the knowledge and the information to the policy and practice and enforcement.
So this makes so much sense. And this kind of idea is how this fellowship program at Sustainable Partners was ideated and built. Do you want to talk a little bit about the program?
Yeah, well, it's been an incredible summer, this program. The fellowship program at Sustainable Partners was to take the idea that you could combine research and advocacy in the same effort. So having fellows who came with more of the orientation from research, from fellows who came from more of the advocacy and campaigning side, have them design the projects together from the beginning, so that the research has certainly had the independence and the quality of serious academic research, but that it was developed with recommendations and with an idea about how to move those recommendations forward to affect change on the issue that the research was focused on. So the fellowship was an opportunity for undergraduate and graduate students from around the world, and really we had fellows from all over to come together and work in those kind of cross-disciplinary teams in the way that you need to bring in lots of different kinds of expertise for these complex issues, and to draw on all of those that enthusiasm and that commitment and that and all of the different kinds of backgrounds that our fellows brought, and for them to work together to create something new that was bigger than themselves, and to draw on each other's creativity and knowledge to be able to really come up with something new and exciting.
Amazing. So we're going to be talking with two of the fellows today. One who focused on research this past summer and one who focused on advocacy. But like you said, the whole point of the fellowship program was for those who focused on research and those who focused on advocacy to come together and create these projects together. And let's welcome them into the conversation.
Hi. Hi, Mila. Can you hear me, guys?
Hi. Yeah. Yes. Oh, it's so nice to see you both.
Yeah.
Nice to see you as well.
Yeah. Nia, thank you so much for joining us. It's great. What is climate justice?
Wow. I I don't know if there's a simple answer for that. So when I think about justice in general, I think about how we want to sort of level the playing fields in whatever field we might be talking about. In law, we're trying to make sure that a wronged party gets the actionable, correct thing that they deserve, they get their justice. And so to me, climate justice would be giving the wronged party, the climate, the planet, the people who live here, their actionable item, the thing that they deserve to live here. And I feel like I've overcomplicated it already, but it's not a simple it's not a simple answer, unfortunately. It really is just making sure that we have a planet that we deserve to live on and making it last for a lot longer.
Great, thanks. And Rai, to you, what is climate justice?
Yeah, I think Nia did a great job of kind of explaining the concept. But for me, I think it's just recognizing that that climate change or environmental issues are having differentiated impact. They're having kind of different social, environmental, health, economic consequences on different groups of people. So once we begin to recognize that, once we begin to recognize the inequity within that, it's about it's about changing that. So climate justice is about recognizing and then hopefully trying to reduce the inequality and the kind of social inequality is made worse by climate change. Yeah.
So climate justice was the theme for the fellowship this summer, and both of you worked on incredibly interesting projects that we'll get to in a little while. But I'm curious, and let's start with Rai. What is the most interesting thing that you learned this summer?
For me, I think you guys talked about kind of main topic of this podcast being kind of research and advocacy, and for me, it was understanding kind of I guess how the different moving parts about research and advocacy and how they go so hand in hand, and trying to really grapple with like some of the ethics of research, trying to grapple with some of just the very how consuming kind of research and advocacy can be. For everything from editing. So research and advocacy as such a communication is such a big part of research and advocacy. Recognizing so the editing goes hand in hand with that. Recognizing that planning your research and collaborating with other researchers, again, that takes a lot of skill, that takes a lot of effort, that takes a lot of time. So this entire process, I think, the process of having 4 or 5 different people from around the world being in a team and working to kind of solve one issue. I think that was the most interesting part of this entire summer for me. And I've done research before, but maybe I've done it for myself, as a dissertation, but I've never done it like this. That was an incredible experience.
And Nia?
Yeah, I completely agree, ditto. I think specifically regarding our project, the most interesting thing I found was how modern our waste infrastructure is. It's not until very recently that we started having issues with landfills and not being able to get rid of plastics and microplastics because things had always been made to be disposed of or to be disposed of appropriately. So it was really interesting to me to find out just how modern this issue is.
So just to follow up on that, Nia, you started talking a little bit about your project, and since it is focused on waste, but the whole theme for the summer was climate justice, how is waste a climate justice issue?
Well, it starts with waste being recognized as a climate issue. I don't think a lot of people understand how it factors into carbon emissions, taking up space, just lowering air quality all around. So it starts as a climate issue. And when we recognize it as a climate issue, in order for it to be fixed, we have to incorporate climate justice. So we know that there are communities that are being negatively and disproportionately impacted by waste created by other communities. They're the harmed party here that needs justice. When we think about, even as I was saying earlier, how waste used to be disposed of in completely different ways, there was an entire industry of just turning your cloth into paper. All of those people don't have jobs anymore because it doesn't exist as an infrastructure. Those are wronged parties. So when we think about the way waste affects the world around us, it's only fair to try and mitigate a lot of those issues for the people around us too.
And Rai, can you tell us a tiny bit about your project and how it fits into this climate justice framing?
Yeah, sure. So our project was about basically public coastal access and this notion of the right to the sea and the right to the oceans. Uh, so we kind of started with thinking about the effects of climate change, the effects of on different communities, basically, of climate change. And we started thinking about, for example, native communities who will be affected by the effect of sea level rise. And then from that, we had this notion that of this kind of notion of public coastal access, which is actually a right, and it's a legal right enshrined in, for example, in U.S. law, in U.K. law, and common law all across the world. And we realize that all across, but even though it's this right and it's this kind of fundamental right we would see across these different nations, every community defines it very differently. So from this idea of public coastal access, we linked it back to climate justice in the sense that sea levels will be rising as a result of climate change, and that differentiated impact needs to be addressed. And the only way to tackle that differentiated impact is that we need to replace that with an equitable solution and equitable framework, and one that can be followed all across the world. Because for this issue, we were so surprised that there was very little global agreement on the basics on what would constitute public coastal access, how we would measure it, how we could protect that. So yeah.
For both of you, both from the point of view of advocacy and of research, there were a lot, we had a lot of different kinds of inputs over the course of the summer. And I'm curious about what were the parts of the fellowship that you thought were really helpful and you felt advanced your understanding of either research or advocacy or climate justice or all of the above. Nia, could you talk a little bit about the other activities of the fellowship?
Yeah, I think my favorite was probably when we met with Graham Watts and he just broke down how to write effectively. I've always loved workshopping my writing, so that was a lot of fun. And we learned a lot of skills that I hope to keep using. I hope that I'll find a use case for them even past this fellowship. I think what I liked the most, really and truly, and Rai, you touched on this earlier, was just the diversity of the program. So you've got everyone from all over the world coming together to do this kind of massive research project on a topic that somehow interests all of you in completely different situations, completely different backgrounds. Our advisor, Sarah, was really great. She was super helpful walking us through everything and super responsive. And that was a really good experience, was having someone right there with us, sort of a third party to be like, hey, this needs work, this needs more information. I see where you're going with this. This makes sense. So yeah, I loved it. It was a great experience.
Rai, for you?
Yeah, so I think I would agree with a lot of what Nia just said. Session with Graham Watts was so useful, and yeah, writing is such a crucial part of advocacy, especially for an issue like climate change, which is so difficult. Fundamentally, it's a scientific concept that you then need to communicate to the masses. So that translation, turning that into a social political issue, is all about how you communicate that. So that was really interesting. Learning how to kind of communicate effectively, and I know that's something I'll take away for the rest of, as long as I keep writing, basically. Beyond that, again, also our advisor, she was Amira, she was so great and so helpful. And again, gives you different kind of perspective on, not just on kind of how you edit later on, but also just how you formulate the research process, coming up with an hypothesis, coming up with a kind of research statement. Very, very useful, and something I take, taken away from the summer. And finally, I think the session we had at the beginning, so as we started the fellowship, we had the induction weekend, and we had speakers that, Mila, you and Adam had brought on. And I remember Aniket Shah, for example, he was talking about ESG frameworks. And I've always been fairly, from my academic background, we've been taught to be very kind of skeptical of these kind of corporate endeavors to maybe greenwash climate change. But I think listening to it from his perspective really did change the way I thought about that. So that was very interesting. Yeah.
Hmm, that's great. Thanks.
Mila, I have a question for you. So Nia talked about how the groups came together and it was like magic. What was that like for you in constructing the group since you ran the fellowship this summer?
Well, it was magic for me too. The one of the things that was really important to us when we were launching the fellowship and the call for applications was to try to reach potential applicants from in countries around the world with a lot of different kinds of expertise. And so we really targeted the outreach that we did to make sure it was as global as possible, that it was we focused on a number of countries and regions. And we also tailored the outreach for research and advocacy so that we would get those different kinds of skills and that we would bring in the kind of variety of backgrounds that we were looking for. So we started with a tremendous candidate pool, hundreds of applicants and impressive applicants from so many different places. So we were already starting from a really good point of view, a really good position. But I would say that the final fellows who we chose through this very careful review process, both of you will remember the intensity of our discussions and our rounds of interviews, and really wanting to make sure that we had had taken advantage of that great pool of talent to find the greatest talents.
So I learned a few really interesting things from the fellows as well, and I'm curious, Mila, what you feel you took away from them. One is something that I didn't expect to learn and is not on the climate justice topic. It's that people younger than I am don't use email anymore. So I guess that's a thing that I need to, be aware of. And I didn't realize how old I was until I started, realizing that people weren't using email. But that's definitely something I'll take away. But also the projects themselves, the papers that they wrote, and the advocacy materials that were created were such great pairings. I think that both groups did an incredible job, like Rai was talking about earlier, about effective communication of really complex ideas. And it helped me to understand ideas that I knew nothing about, even though I live and breathe this space all the time. I'm curious, Mila, are there any specific takeaways that you got from the fellows?
All of those, yes. I was really struck by the kind of speed and flexibility of how you all kind of just very quickly developed your research. You pivoted a lot as you found things out. I mean, it was kind of exactly what you're looking for in an extremely expert research group, which is of being able to navigate a very complex field and find where the gaps were that you could help fill in. Additionally, I think the ways that in both groups, as you started thinking about advocacy, you really looked at recommendations, at concrete recommendations. So making that move from the research to the kind of change that the research could support. And then also very quickly, both groups were so nimble in then thinking about what kind of campaign would help support moving forward those recommendations. So I completely agree with Adam. I think from the advocacy point of view, you really built on what the research had been, and produced great ideas with beautiful materials to drive them forward. So I was really impressed by that.
I want to thank both of you for your incredible dedication and energy and excitement and work this summer. It created 2 projects and 1 fellowship that was incredibly inspiring for me. And I also want to give an enormous thanks to Mila, who guided this program. It came out, and the results of the program and the process of it were more than anything I could have possibly imagined. So thank you all for making that and this program happen in different ways.
Thank you, Mila and Adam. We couldn't have done it without you guys.
Thank you so much, Mila.
Thank you both.